The heavy oak doors of the executive conference room stood slightly ajar as I walked past, the voice of my father-in-law Edward Caldwell booming through the corridor. "Innovation comes from youth," he declared, his tone full-chested and performative, like a man pitching a revolutionary idea to a room full of sycophants. I did not break my stride. At 48 years old, I had spent the last 3 years hearing variations of that same speech. I heard it at my wedding when he toasted his daughter for choosing a sensible man and then subtly reminded the crowd that I had kept the catering under budget. For 3 years, I had poured my soul into this family-owned logistics firm, working 14-hour days, logging in on weekends, and holding the fragile ecosystem together with sheer willpower and an endless stream of black coffee. And despite the familial connection, I was treated like an outsider. In Edward Caldwell's kingdom, being a son-in-law was functionally equivalent to being an indentured servant with a better suit. Nepotism did not give me a leg up, it effectively buried me. Edward preferred the optics of keeping me in the trenches, allowing him to play the benevolent monarch who handed out lucrative opportunities to external hires, while keeping his own family strictly in check. He called it fairness and corporate integrity. I called it a humiliation tactic equipped with a mediocre 401k plan. During my tenure, I built the entire logistics pipeline from the ground up. I negotiated exclusive supplier agreements with firms that had ignored Edward's calls for over a decade. I transformed a chaotic department that relied on outdated spreadsheets and sheer luck into a streamlined machine boasting a 22% profit growth year over year. No one applauded. In fact, most of the executives barely acknowledged my presence unless something went wrong. The only time my name graced a company-wide memo was when I enforced travel policy and canceled a vice president's trip to Napa because he attempted to expense a luxury couple's massage. That same executive once asked me if I was the administrative assistant to the receptionist. I ran 5 departments, but I smiled and fetched his reports anyway. I stayed because a naive part of me believed that relentless hard work would eventually outshine the arbitrary rules of bloodlines and golfing buddies. I thought that competence would ultimately weigh more heavily on the scales than being born into the right country club demographic. It was a foolish assumption. If you have ever been the invisible backbone of an organization, unnoticed until something breaks, you understand why I began keeping meticulous records. I did not just save invoices. I archived emails, cataloged contracts, scrutinized renewal clauses, and monitored access logs. I operated with the calculated paranoia of a man who had seen too many incompetent legacy hires promoted simply for remembering to wear a tie. This instinct led me to draft a highly specific clause in a major renewal packet for our key supplier, North Axis. Hidden within the dense legalese, I negotiated a provision granting me personally exclusive liaison status for vendor management. I recalled the corporate attorney pausing when I insisted on its inclusion, questioning if such an arrangement was standard practice. I merely smiled and informed her that sometimes it is necessary to secure one's handwriting before it gets erased. That brings us to the golf lunch, the catalyst for the entire disaster. Edward had been in unusually high spirits all week, whistling out of tune and strutting around the office like a man experiencing a very lucrative midlife crisis. Over dinner, my wife mentioned casually that her father had played a round of golf with his old friend Harold Reed. Harold's son, Jason Reed, had recently graduated with a generic business degree and was looking for an internship. Just for a quarter, she said, conveying her father's belief that the boy had potential. I cut my steak with methodical precision, feeling a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. A week later, Jason Reed arrived at the office. His teeth were blindingly white, his handshake aggressively firm, and his shoes looked entirely too expensive for an entry-level position. The executive team fawned over him. Edward personally gave him a grand tour of the facility, a courtesy I had never received. Within a day, Jason was situated at a desk 2 spots down from mine, equipped with dual monitors and a window view, while I continued to operate on the aging laptop I had purchased with my own funds. On his 3rd day, Jason leaned over and asked me how to access the secure project drive. I offered a polite smile and told him I would have a T set up his credentials. I also suggested he read through the supplier exclusivity clauses, specifically the one concerning North Axis, warning him it was more complex than it appeared. He stared at me blankly, repeating the name North Axis, as if it were a foreign concept. I tapped my temple and told him vendor management required a deep understanding of the historical context. I did not tell him that the institutional knowledge he sought was buried in files only I could unlock. 2 weeks after Jason's miraculous descent into our open-plan purgatory, the rumors started circulating. A massive new initiative was being planned, something designed to double our revenue by streamlining logistics for high-volume clients. It was based on a proprietary system I had been sketching out during my scant free time, between mitigating vendor crises and auditing expense reports. This was the project, a career-defining endeavor that would cement my legacy. I had laid the groundwork long before Jason Reed even knew how to format a calendar invite. My team had already successfully prototyped a module that reduced lead times by 18%. We were primed and ready. Then, on a Tuesday evening, my wife walked into the kitchen with a bright smile. "Dad is talking about that logistics expansion," she said, her voice filled with genuine excitement. "He is incredibly impressed. He told me you essentially built the whole foundation. He is going to give it to you." I did not respond immediately. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the cold reality settle over me. I knew the cadence of this corporate fable. The loyal architect does not inherit the estate. He is sidelined in favor of the charming newcomer who once painted a fence. Despite my cynicism, a small spark of hope ignited. What if my late nights and flawless client presentations finally mattered? The next morning, I arrived before the cleaning staff, organized my data, and forwarded a comprehensive report to Edward, complete with optimized metrics. His only reply was a single thumbs-up emoji. Later that afternoon, I saw Edward across the street at a cafe, sharing lunch with Harold Reed and Jason. They were laughing, Edward gesturing expansively as if mapping out a grand strategy. Jason nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the complexities of vendor service level agreements. Back at the office, a sticky note on Jason's monitor read, "Call North Axis guy about clause." I stared at it for a full minute before retreating to the break room to collect myself. No official announcement had been made, so I continued pushing the timeline forward, drafting a Phase 1 fast-track model. I saved it in a secured folder labeled Contingency. That evening, Edward sent a company-wide email detailing an exciting expansion, filled with hollow corporate jargon about synergistic optimization and strategic client engagement. My team rallied around me, offering premature congratulations, but my intuition told a different story. I had seen Edward hand the keys to the kingdom to unqualified heirs before. The confirmation came in the form of catered pastries in the main conference room. Edward only ordered high-end catering when he needed to soften the blow of a profound betrayal. I took a seat near the back, embracing my strategic invisibility honed over 3 agonizing years. Edward entered last, accompanied by Jason, who clutched a brand-new laptop like a shield. "Team," Edward began, his voice dripping with condescending sincerity. "As you know, we are embarking on a monumental phase of growth." He clicked his presentation remote, revealing a slide titled Project Elevate in a shockingly unprofessional font. "We have analyzed the metrics and decided this initiative requires fresh eyes," he continued, completely dismissing the exhaustive 5-month report I had submitted. "Therefore, I am thrilled to announce that Jason Reed will be leading Project Elevate as our interim strategic innovation lead." A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. It was a vacuum that drained all logic and common sense. A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Edward beamed with misplaced pride, while Jason stood up awkwardly, expressing his eagerness to learn and lead. I smiled and clapped exactly 3 times, polite and measured. The rest of the room followed suit in confused compliance. Edward did not acknowledge me once. There was no mention of the foundational architecture I had built, the vendor frameworks I had established, or the client transitions I had mapped out. All that mattered was Jason, an intern with an inflated sense of capability. I did not cause a scene. I walked back to my desk, organized my files, and retrieved a fresh legal pad from the supply closet. The parameters of the game had shifted, and I needed to draft a new strategy. 2 hours later, Jason approached my desk, looking visibly anxious and holding a printed copy of the North Axis Agreement. Richard, he started tentatively, do you have the original document for this exclusivity clause? I am having trouble parsing the renewal language. I let the silence stretch until he began to fidget. Then I offered a serene smile and informed him that managing that document was no longer within the scope of my responsibilities. I stood up and walked toward Edward's office. The scent of expensive mahogany and poor decisions hit me as I entered without knocking. Edward was on a call, attempting to sound authoritative while shuffling meaningless papers. He waved me in dismissively, assuring the person on the other end that Jason would quarterback the vendor handoff. When he finally hung up, he put on a facade of paternal warmth. Richard, big day, he said. I hope you are ready to support Jason as we ramp up. Support Jason. The audacity was staggering. I maintained my composure. I just wanted to thank you, I said, my voice perfectly level. He looked momentarily confused, asking what I was thanking him for. For the opportunity and for clarifying my exact standing in this organization, I replied. I placed a crisp white envelope on his desk. His expression shifted from confusion to irritation as he realized someone was dictating terms to him. He opened the envelope and read the single sentence inside. I, Richard Caldwell, resign effective 2 weeks from today. His mouth opened and closed silently before he managed to speak. You are joking, right? He demanded. No, I answered politely. I will ensure a clean handover. He leaned back, attempting to regain control. Is this about the project? You are taking this entirely too personally. I tilted my head slightly. You made it personal the moment you decided an intern was more valuable than the architect of your success. He stared at the resignation letter, completely devoid of a counter-argument. As I turned to leave, I paused at the door. I will transfer access to the general files, I noted, but some of the contracts require legal clearance, particularly the exclusivity renewals. Before he could question me, I walked out. I had already blind copied the North Axis legal team on my notice of departure, invoking Clause 9C regarding the termination of the contractual liaison. I packed my belongings methodically. There was no dramatic farewell email, just quiet, precise closure. I archived my folders, drafted meticulous handover notes for the generic processes, and left intentional gaps in the proprietary files. By late afternoon, the rumors of my departure had spread. By evening, Jason was locked out of the supplier dashboard due to restricted access protocols. When I told my wife I had resigned, she was stunned but ultimately supportive, acknowledging the toll the job had taken on me. The next morning, I officially registered my own consulting LLC and forwarded a highly confidential folder to my personal server, labeled Vendor Leverage. The ensuing 2 weeks were a masterclass in bureaucratic collapse. The machinery of the company began to grind to a halt. A former colleague forwarded me an urgent message asking for the North Axis contact, stating they were hitting a wall on procurement. That wall was a legal firewall I had built. When I negotiated the North Axis agreement, I insisted on a single point of contact to prevent fragmented communication. Clause 7.2 clearly stated that any transfer of the liaison role required 30 days' notice and explicit written approval from North Axis Legal. Jason had ignored this entirely. Consequently, all orders were rejected. The automated response from North Axis simply cited contract terms and refused to process requests from unauthorized personnel. Jason panicked, desperately cold-calling vendor representatives who refused to engage. Shortly after, another major vendor flagged a delivery clause. Their contract included a timeline penalty waiver contingent on my direct oversight. Without me, exorbitant fees were automatically reinstated. The budget for Project Elevate ballooned astronomically, and deadlines became fictional concepts. I watched the disaster unfold from a distance, feeling a profound sense of detached curiosity. The breaking point arrived during a recorded vendor check-in. Jason was leading the call when the client inquired about the licensing handover for the Phase 2 IP architecture. Jason, entirely out of his depth, chuckled and admitted he was unsure who owned the IP, assuming it was somewhere in my old files. The client abruptly ended the call. The illusion of competence was shattered. My phone began ringing constantly. I ignored the unknown numbers and listened to frantic voicemails from junior managers detailing the chaos. Edward was blaming the suppliers, Jason was blaming the legal department, and the company was hemorrhaging money. I spent my days in a bright, modern co-working space, finalizing a consulting retainer draft. North Axis had already prepaid for 6 months of my services. Edward Caldwell finally called me on a quiet Tuesday. I let it ring 4 times before answering with a crisp, professional greeting, Richard. His voice sounded strained. I just wanted to check in. We have hit a few minor snags with Elevate. Growing pains, you understand. I thought perhaps we could bring you in temporarily to smooth things out. The desperation was palpable. I informed him that I was now consulting full-time. He offered a short-term engagement. I told him I would consider it and send a proposal. I drafted a contract that tripled my previous salary, included strict vendor protection clauses, and required a 90-day minimum retainer paid in advance. I emailed it and watched the read receipt trigger instantly. The next morning, the funds were wired into my LLC's account, but Edward's fundamental misunderstanding of the industry remained. He believed clients were loyal to a corporate logo, failing to realize they were loyal to the competence and reliability I provided. The ultimate reckoning came courtesy of the Hexler Group, the company's most lucrative client. They demanded an emergency meeting with the board of directors. A contact inside the company provided me with the minutes. Edward attempted to placate them, assuring them the new team was capable. The Hexler strategist brutally cut him off, stating that the new team was entirely incompetent. They announced the immediate termination of their contract, unless I was re-engaged. When Edward tried to mention legal transitions, Hexler informed him they had already signed a direct contract with my consulting firm. They would now coordinate entirely through me. Edward tried to spin the massive loss of revenue as strategic delegation, but the board saw the reality. Hexler constituted nearly 18% of the quarterly revenue, and it was now flowing directly to my LLC. Other mid-tier clients quickly followed suit, reaching out to me through back channels to transition their accounts. The board demanded accountability. Edward's pastel PowerPoint presentations could no longer mask the financial hemorrhage. During an emergency board meeting, the true extent of the damage was laid bare. The corporate legal counsel presented my exit documentation. Section D, Clause 4B, clearly stated that I retained all rights to the IP framework I had authored unless formally reassigned by the board prior to my departure. Edward had blindly signed the document, assuming it was standard boilerplate. The counsel confirmed that I legally owned the operating architecture of Project Elevate. Furthermore, because Edward failed to initiate revocation clauses on my data access, I was the one who voluntarily revoked my own credentials, strictly adhering to compliance protocols. Jason Reed quietly packed his belongings and exited the boardroom, never to return. Edward was left facing a furious board of directors with no leverage and a decimated client roster. He asked the legal counsel what options remained. Her response was simple: negotiate. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my new office, reviewing contracts and hiring a dedicated assistant. A few weeks later, I attended an upscale industry networking event. The room was filled with investors and executives discussing scalable synergies. I saw Edward standing near the entrance, looking diminished and hollow. He spotted me negotiating a massive deal with a competitor he had previously failed to acquire. He watched in stunned silence as I commanded the respect he had always assumed was his birthright. A senior board member stood near him, remarking quietly that I had salvaged what I could, leaving the rest to burn. The executive from the logistics firm slid the final contract across the table. I signed my name with absolute certainty, securing a multi-year six-figure partnership. I did not look back at Edward. There was no need for a dramatic confrontation. True victory is realizing you no longer have to fight a battle, because the war has already been definitively won. Edward Caldwell built his empire on the assumption of inherited loyalty and arbitrary authority. I built mine on meticulous contracts, strategic foresight, and undeniable competence. The company he tried to protect was left crippled by its own arrogance, while I walked away with the intellectual property, the clients, and the absolute certainty that true value cannot be assigned. It must be earned. As the fallout continued, the legal ramifications of Edward's mismanagement began to surface. Several vendors initiated proceedings citing breach of fiduciary duty, noting that the sudden change in liaison without proper notice violated the core tenets of their service agreements. One particularly aggressive supplier even threatened to invoke the Warren Act, arguing that the massive structural changes and subsequent loss of contracts constituted a de facto shutdown of the logistics division, impacting their dedicated workforce. While legally a stretch, the threat alone forced Edwards' legal team into a defensive panic. Furthermore, an internal audit revealed that Jason had attempted to sign off on several complex compliance documents by tracing my digital signature, a clear violation of forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. Because Jason was acting under Edwards' direct supervision and explicit promotion, the liability flowed straight to the top. The contracts Jason signed were deemed void ab initio, meaning they were legally invalid from the moment of creation, throwing months of logistical planning into absolute chaos. The situation escalated when an older, semi-retired vendor, who had relied heavily on my specific management style to navigate complex financial hurdles, filed a formal complaint. He argued that the sudden, incompetent transition and subsequent financial losses amounted to a violation of elder financial abuse under California Welfare and Institutions Code Section 1561030, claiming that the company, through gross negligence, had deprived him of significant property rights. The sheer volume of legal challenges was staggering. Edwards' once pristine corporate reputation was dragged through endless arbitration hearings and settlement negotiations. The board eventually forced him into an early, unceremonious retirement, citing a catastrophic failure of leadership and risk management. The company was fractured, its most profitable divisions sold off to competitors, including several firms I now advised. I watched the dismantling of Edward Caldwell's legacy not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a meticulously executed contract coming to its natural conclusion. I had given them exactly what they asked for: my resignation. They simply failed to calculate the cost of my departure. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building. The corporate landscape is unforgiving to those who mistake authority for competence. The fallout from the disastrous Project Elevate transition served as a grim case study in countless business seminars across the country. Analysts dissected the series of cascading failures, pinpointing the exact moment Edward Caldwell prioritized nepotism over foundational stability. The legal battles dragged on for months, a tangled web of breached contracts, voided agreements, and furious vendors seeking restitution for the chaos unleashed by an intern's profound lack of experience. I continued to build my consultancy, expanding my reach across the industry, taking on clients who valued precision and accountability. The empty promises of synergistic growth and interim strategic leadership were replaced by concrete metrics, airtight legal frameworks, and a relentless focus on execution. In the end, the true cost of disrespecting the architect is the inevitable collapse of the building.